There is a particular word that gets sharpened in some families until it can cut, and in mine, that word was selfish. I heard it before I understood it. I heard it when I kept the last cookie, and I heard it when I, at 34 years old, refused to hand over the house I had spent a decade of my life paying for. The word never changed. Only the size of the thing they wanted from me did. I want to tell you how my sister Megan stood in the kitchen I bought, under the light fixture I chose, and explained to a room full of people who shared my blood that the house was, in every way that mattered, already hers. And I want to tell you what I did about it, which was, for a long time, almost nothing at all. Because the strange thing about quiet justice is that it rarely looks like justice while it's happening. It looks like patience. It looks like a woman saying very little and writing everything down. If a story about boundaries, family, and the slow art of letting someone bury themselves is the kind of thing you find yourself returning to, take a second to subscribe. It genuinely helps these stories reach the people who need them. So let me ask you a few things before we begin, the way I asked myself in the months that followed. Have you ever been told you were cruel for simply keeping what was yours? Have you ever watched someone rewrite the history of your own generosity right in front of you until you came out the villain? Have you ever handed someone a key out of love and watched them treat it as a deed? And here is the one that kept me awake. When the people who are supposed to protect you decide you are the problem, how long do you stay quiet before quiet becomes a kind of lie you tell yourself? I didn't know the answers then. I was just a woman with a 4-month work contract in another state, a spare bedroom, and a sister who needed somewhere to land. I thought I was being kind. Let me show you exactly how kindness in the wrong family becomes an invitation. Let's start with the house, because you have to understand what it was before you can understand what it cost me to nearly lose it. It was nothing grand. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a kitchen with cabinets that didn't quite close, and a backyard the size of a parking space. But it was mine in a way nothing in my life had ever been mine. I bought it at 31, after years of the kind of saving that isn't glamorous. No vacations, lunches packed in the same scratched container, a car I drove until the dashboard lights became decorative. I put down every dollar myself. My name, and only my name, is on the deed. My name, and only my name, is on the mortgage that still has 18 years left to run. I tell you this not to brag, because there is nothing to brag about in a small house and a long loan. I tell you because of what it meant. Every other woman in my family measured worth by what you gave away. I had quietly decided to measure it by what I could build and keep. That difference, that one small private rebellion, is the seed of everything that happened next. In a family that called saving selfish, owning something outright wasn't an achievement. It was a provocation. Picture the first dinner I hosted there. My mother walked through the rooms with her arms crossed, the way you'd inspect a hotel you weren't sure you'd recommend. She didn't say congratulations. She said, all this space, just for you, as if a person living alone in her own home were a kind of waste, a pantry left too full while others went hungry. I laughed it off. I always laughed it off. That, I would learn, was its own kind of mistake, the way you train people to believe that the things they take from you don't really hurt. So that was the stage. A house I loved, owned alone, and a family that experienced my having it as something done to them. Now, let me tell you about the phone call that opened the door, because it came wrapped, as these things always do, in someone else's crisis. The call came on a Tuesday in March. It was my mother, not Megan, which should have told me something. In my family, the person who wants the favor is rarely the one who asks for it. They send the soft messenger first. Your sister's marriage is over, my mother said, and there was a heaviness in it, a practiced grief. Megan's husband had left. There were 2 children, Lily and Noah, 9 and 6. There was a lease Megan couldn't afford alone, and a credit score the divorce had quietly shredded, and nowhere, my mother said, nowhere for those babies to go. And then she said the thing she had clearly come to say. "You're going to be gone for months anyway. That whole house, sitting empty. That whole house, sitting empty. Do you hear how the framing does the work? My home wasn't mine to lend. It was a resource being wasted, a wrong in need of correcting, and I was the only one selfish enough to let it sit there serving just one person. Me. I had, in fact, just signed a 4-month contract 3 states away. The timing was almost too neat. I would be gone from April to August. The house would be empty, the mortgage would be paid whether anyone slept there or not, and here was my sister with 2 small children and nowhere to land. When you lay it out like that, what kind of person says no? Let me be honest with you about my own heart in that moment, because this is where I want you to see me clearly. I didn't agree out of pure generosity. Part of me agreed to stop being the villain. I was tired of the word. I thought if I just gave enough, finally gave the big thing, I'd be done. I'd be the good sister, the good daughter, and they'd have nothing left to hold against me. That's the trap, isn't it? You think generosity will buy you peace. It only ever buys you a reputation as someone who can be moved. So I said yes. I said she could stay while I was gone, rent-free, just keep the utilities current and keep the place clean. A few months, a roof, while she got back on her feet. I even felt good about it on the drive to the airport. I want you to remember that feeling, that warm, foolish, self-congratulating glow, because it is the last time in this story that I felt simple about anything. Now, here is where instinct enters and where I ignored it, which is the real beginning of my troubles. Let me tell you about the lock. About 3 weeks after I left, I called to check in, and a man's voice in the background said something, and I heard a drill, an actual drill. Megan, breezy, told me she'd had the locks changed. "For the kids' safety," she said. "You can't be too careful." And I, sitting in a furnished apartment in a city where I knew no one, felt the first cold drop of something I didn't yet have a name for. Think about the logic of it for a moment, because she counted on me not thinking. Changing the locks on a house you're borrowing means one thing, and one thing only, that the owner can no longer get in. I asked, lightly, keeping my voice as breezy as hers, whether she'd make me a copy. There was a pause. "Of course," she said. Remind me, as if a key to my own front door were a small errand she might get to a library book she'd return when it was convenient. I didn't get that key for 2 months, and every time I asked, the answer softened and curdled at the same time. She was so busy. The kids were so much. Wasn't it easier this way, with me so far off? Each excuse was reasonable on its own. That's the thing about a slow takeover. No single step is alarming enough to fight over. You'd feel petty objecting. A lock, a key. Who starts a war over a key? But lay the steps end to end, and you see the staircase for what it is, climbing somewhere you never agreed to go. Here is what I understand now that I didn't then. The lock was never about the children's safety. The lock was a flag planted in soil. It was the first physical statement of a story she had already begun telling herself, and soon would tell everyone else, that this was her territory now, and I was the intruder who might show up uninvited. She didn't change the locks to keep danger out. She changed them to keep me out. And I, wanting so badly to be the easy one, the good one, told myself I was being paranoid. Let me tell you what paranoia actually is. Paranoia is fear without evidence. What I had was evidence without permission to believe it. And so I move us now to the part where the evidence stopped being something I could ignore because she started showing me, almost proudly, what she was building in my absence. It came through photographs, which is its own bitter joke. Megan had never been much for keeping in touch, but suddenly she was sending pictures. Look at the kids' new room. Look how I brightened up the living room. Look. And at first I made myself see it the way she framed it, a struggling mother nesting, making a hard season bearable for her children. Who could resent that? But look closer, the way I eventually forced myself to. The pictures told a different story than the captions did. In one, my grandmother's armchair, the one piece of furniture I owned that had any history, that had sat in my grandmother's parlor for 40 years, was simply gone, I asked. Megan said it didn't go with the new look, and she'd found it a good home. She had given away my grandmother's chair the way you'd rehome a stray, without a flicker of the thought that it was not hers to give. In another picture, the walls of my bedroom, the one room I'd asked her to leave alone and use for storage, were painted a color I'd never have chosen, and her clothes hung in my closet. She'd moved into the primary bedroom, not the guest room I'd offered, mine. When I asked, gently, always gently, she said the kids needed to be near her, and the layout just made more sense this way. It made more sense to her to sleep in the bed of the woman whose house she was borrowing. Sit with that. Now, you might be wondering why I didn't fly home and end it. I've asked myself the same thing 1,000 times. The honest answer is that I was bound by the contract, that flying home meant breaking it and torching my income for the year, and that some part of me, the part trained from childhood, still could not quite believe my own sister would do what the evidence was plainly telling me she was doing. We are slow to accept betrayal from the people we are supposed to trust. That slowness is not stupidity. It is love, misfiring. But love that ignores evidence isn't kindness. It's just a slower way of being robbed. So I did the only thing I could do from 3 states away. I stopped reacting, and I started recording. And that decision, quiet, unglamorous, made at a kitchen counter at midnight, is the hinge on which this entire story turns. Let me show you what I mean, because it begins with something I'd nearly forgotten I owned. When I'd bought the house, I'd installed cameras, not many, a doorbell camera at the front, one in the back corner of the yard, one in the kitchen that I'd put up during a season of break-ins on my street and then mostly forgotten about. They ran to an app on my phone. I had never told Megan they were there, not out of cunning, but because it had simply never come up. People don't announce the smoke detectors to a house guest, and in the rush of leaving, I'd never turn them off. I want to be careful here, because I know how this sounds. I did not set a trap. The cameras were already mine, already there, recording the common areas of my own home, as they had for years. But one night, lonely and uneasy in that borrowed apartment, I opened the app I hadn't checked in months. And there, in grainy color, was my kitchen, and there was my sister, and there was a conversation I was never meant to hear. Picture me, hunched over a small screen in the dark, watching a woman I'd shared a childhood bedroom with lean against my counter and tell a friend, "Oh, Claire's not coming back to this. She's got her fancy job. Why would she want this little place? Honestly, between you and me, it's basically mine now. The friend laughed. Megan laughed, and I sat very still, the way you do when you finally see the shape of a thing you'd only felt in the dark. Here is what changed in me that night, and I want you to understand it clearly, because it's the difference between a victim and a witness. I stopped feeling. Not forever. The feeling came back later, in waves, in the shower, at red lights. But in that moment I made a decision that the feeling could wait. What could not wait was the record. So I did something that felt cold and was, I have come to believe, the kindest thing I ever did for myself. I started saving the footage. Every clip that mattered, downloaded and dated and filed away where no drill, no lock, no story she told could reach it. You see, a story is a fragile thing. It depends on no one having kept the receipts. Megan's entire plan, though I don't think she'd have called it a plan, depended on a world in which it was my word against hers, the selfish sister against the desperate mother, and we all know which one a family like mine chooses to believe. What she did not know was that the house itself was listening, and the house, unlike me, had never once been trained to call the truth selfish. So now I had evidence. But evidence of what, exactly? Bad manners aren't a crime. Giving away a chair is rude, not illegal. Painting a wall is presumptuous, not actionable. For all my careful filing, I still didn't have the thing that turns a family grievance into a matter with consequences. I needed her to reach further than rudeness. And this is the part I am least proud of understanding. I knew that if I simply stayed quiet and let her keep climbing that staircase, she would. People who mistake your silence for surrender always do. Let me tell you how far she reached. It was July when my mother called again, and this time the softness was gone. This time she was angry, on Megan's behalf, in that way that always managed to make my sister's wants sound like my failures. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said. The contract was ending. I'd mentioned, weeks earlier and warmly, that I'd be home in August and would need my house back, and we'd get Megan settled somewhere of her own. That sentence, apparently, had detonated, because Megan, it turned out, had no intention of leaving, and she had built, in my absence, an entire architecture of justification for staying. She had, my mother informed me, made that house a home for those children while I was off, playing career woman. She had enrolled Lily and Noah in the local elementary school, using the address, my address, making them, in the language she'd clearly been coached in, residents. She had, she claimed, been paying to live there, and therefore had tenants' rights, and you couldn't just throw a tenant and 2 children onto the street. What kind of person would do that? What kind of selfish, heartless person? There it was again. The word deployed at the exact moment she needed cover for taking something that wasn't hers. I want you to notice the pattern, because it's the whole machine in miniature. Every time my family wanted to take from me, they first established that refusing would be selfish. The accusation always arrived a half step before the theft, clearing the road. Selfish wasn't a description of my character. It was a tool, and they reached for it the way you reach for a crowbar. But she'd made a mistake, and it was a large one. To claim tenants' rights, you generally need to be a tenant, which means rent, paid, with some record of it. Megan had paid me nothing. That had been the deal, and I had the bank statements to prove no money had ever changed hands. So in order to make her story stand up, my sister did the thing that turned all of this from a sad family argument into something with teeth. She manufactured the evidence she didn't have. And let me tell you how I found out. Because it arrived in an envelope I almost threw away. A letter came to my apartment, forwarded from the house, on the letterhead of a lawyer I'd never heard of. It was a polite, lawyerly letter, and it referenced, as an enclosure, a copy of a residential lease agreement between Megan and myself, dated the previous spring, establishing her tenancy at a monthly rent, and asserting her rights as a tenant of long standing whom I was now attempting to unlawfully evict. I had never signed such a thing. I had never seen such a thing. And there, on the last page, beneath a paragraph of invented terms, was my signature. I want to tell you what it feels like to look at your own name in your own hand on a document you've never touched. It is a very specific kind of cold. It is the floor tilting. Because a forged signature on a contract is not a family squabble. It is not someone being difficult. It is fraud, a real crime with a real name. And my sister, to keep a house that was mine, to make the word selfish stick to me one final, permanent time, had committed it in writing and mailed it to a lawyer on official letterhead. And here is the strange gift inside that horror, the thing I understood even as my hands shook. She had finally reached past rudeness into something the world outside my family would recognize. For years, my mother and Megan had operated in the one place where the rules were rigged in their favor, the family, where my word never beat theirs, where selfish was a verdict no evidence could overturn. But a forged lease doesn't get judged by my mother. It gets judged by people who have never once been charmed by my sister, people for whom a signature is either real or it isn't. She had walked the argument, all on her own, out of the rigged room and into one where I finally had a chance. Now, let me tell you how I walked through that door, quietly, with everything in a folder. I did not call my sister. I did not call my mother. I did not send the furious, vindicated text that every cell in my body was writing. I want you to understand the discipline of this moment, because it is the whole heart of what I'm trying to tell you. When you finally hold proof, the temptation is to spend it immediately, to wave it in their faces for the pleasure of being right. But proof spent for pleasure is proof wasted. I had something better to do with it. First, I called a lawyer of my own. I brought her the deed, in my name alone. I brought her the mortgage statements, in my name alone. I brought her the bank records showing not $1 of rent had ever been paid to me by anyone. I brought her the dated camera footage of my sister laughing that the house was basically mine now, of my grandmother's chair being carried out the door, of conversations no fabricated lease could survive contact with, and I brought her the forged document itself, with my name on a line my pen had never met. My lawyer was quiet for a moment when she'd finished. Then she said something I've never forgotten. "Your sister didn't just weaken her case," she said. "She handed you a criminal one, because the beautiful, terrible truth of a forgery is that it doesn't just fail to prove the liar's point. It proves the liar lied." Every other thing Megan had claimed, the tenancy, the rent, the abandonment, my supposed cruelty, all of it now hung from a document everyone could see was fake. One lie, written down, had poisoned the whole well she'd been drawing from. But I didn't want a courtroom, not really. I am, despite everything, not built for the scorched earth my family always seemed to crave. What I wanted was simpler and, I think, harder. I wanted the truth to be undeniable in the one room where it had always been denied. I wanted it to happen in front of the people who had called me selfish my entire life. So when my mother announced a family gathering in August, ostensibly a birthday, actually, I knew, a tribunal where I'd be sentenced for trying to take back my own house, I did not refuse. I bought a plane ticket, and I packed a folder. Let me set the scene for you, because I've replayed it more times than I can count. My mother's living room, my sister on the good sofa, in the posture of the wronged, a child tucked under each arm like exhibits, my mother beside her, armed and ready, aunts, a cousin, the full court, and me, walking in alone, the defendant, the selfish one, come at last to answer for the crime of wanting my house back from the woman who'd taken it. They didn't even let me sit down. My mother started before I'd set down my bag. How could I? Those children, after everything Megan's been through, the word selfish, of course, within the first 30 seconds, right on schedule. And I let them. I want you to picture this, because it mattered. I let them talk themselves all the way to the top of the staircase. I let Megan describe, tearfully, the home she'd built and the heartless sister trying to tear it down. I let my mother confirm every word. I let the aunts nod. I let the whole rigged room reach its verdict out loud, on the record, so that there could be no taking it back later. And then, when they had finished, when the silence settled and everyone turned to watch me crumble or beg, I opened the folder, and I did the quietest thing I have ever done. I asked a single question. I turned to Megan, and I said, "Before I say anything, can you tell everyone here how much rent you paid me, and when? Let me tell you what I have learned about a lie in a room full of people. A lie needs momentum. It needs to keep moving so no one can catch up to it. The moment you make it stand still and answer a plain question, it begins to die." Megan hesitated, just a beat, but everyone heard it. And into that beat, I laid down the bank statements, fanned them across the coffee table, every month showing exactly nothing received. "No rent," I said, not loudly, "ever. There was no tenancy. There was a sister staying for free while I was away." My mother started to recover, to reframe. "That doesn't matter. The point is the children, and that is when I placed the lease on the table, the forged one, right side up, so my fake signature faced the room. Then can someone explain this? I said, since I've never seen it before in my life, and that is not my signature. And I set beside it 3 documents that were real: the deed, the mortgage, and a letter from my lawyer, so that anyone in that room could hold the false thing next to the true ones and see, with their own eyes, which was which. I have never heard my mother's house so quiet. You could hear the children breathing. I want to be precise about what happened on the faces in that room, because it is the moment I'd waited a lifetime for, and it was nothing like I'd imagined. There was no triumph in it for me. There was only the slow, awful dawning on every face that the story they had chosen, for years, again and again, the easy story in which I was the selfish one, was a lie that someone had now literally forged. My aunt looked at my sister as though seeing a stranger. My cousin looked at the floor. And my mother, for the first time in my memory, had absolutely nothing to say. But the camera footage is what ended it, and I almost didn't show it because by then I didn't need to. I showed it anyway, one short clip, for the part of me that had spent a lifetime being disbelieved. My sister's voice, filling my mother's silent living room. It's basically mine now. The laughter. There is no reframing a person's own voice. There is no spinning your own face on a screen. The story didn't just fall apart. It was replaced, in real time, by the truth, in my sister's own words, in front of every person whose belief she'd been counting on. Now let me tell you what justice actually looked like, because it was quieter than the movies and it lasted longer. I did not have my sister arrested in that living room. I want to be honest that I thought about it and that the option was real. My lawyer had been clear that the forgery was prosecutable. But I made a different choice, and I made it for me, not for her. I told Megan, in front of everyone, that she had 30 days to be out of my house, that the forged lease was now in my lawyer's hands, and that whether it ever went any further than that depended entirely on how those 30 days went. I didn't need to destroy her. I only needed her to understand, fully and finally, that I could. She was out in 3 weeks. The locks she'd changed. I changed again. There's a small, clean justice in that, in being the last one to decide who holds the key to your own door. My grandmother's chair I never recovered. Some things a takeover takes for good, and you make your peace with the gap. But I walked back into my house in September, my own house, and I stood in the quiet of it, and I understood something I'd had backwards my whole life. Here is the deeper thing, the part I most want you to carry out of this story, because it took me 34 years to learn it. It was never about the house. Do you see? The house was just the biggest thing they'd tried to take, but it was the same move they'd been running since I was a child guarding the last cookie. The accusation of selfishness was never an observation about me. It was a key they used to open me. Selfish was the word they reached for every single time they wanted something that was mine, because they had taught me to fear that word more than I feared losing the thing itself. My sister didn't claim my home because she thought it was hers. She claimed it because, in our family, my things had always, eventually, become available to whoever called me selfish loudly enough. She was just the first to be greedy enough to test how far that went. And the house, finally, was the place where it stopped. There's a postscript, and I'll give it to you because I think you've earned it. About 8 months later, my mother called. Megan's life had not improved. There was a new crisis, a new shortage, and, you can guess, a new opening that I, with my fancy job and my whole house just for me, was perfectly positioned to fill. My mother used the old word. She actually used it. After everything, she told me I had a chance now to not be selfish. And I want to tell you how it felt to say no. It did not feel like revenge. It felt like setting down something I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing the weight. I said, calmly, that I loved them, that I wished Megan well, and that the answer was no. And then, this is the part I did not explain. I did not defend. I did not perform the long, anxious justification I'd performed my entire life to prove I wasn't the thing they kept calling me. I just let the word selfish land, and for the first time, it didn't stick, because I finally understood it had never been a description of me at all. It had only ever been a tool. And you cannot be cut by a tool you've simply decided to set down. So if you've ever been handed that word, selfish, difficult, cold, ungrateful, at the exact moment someone wanted something that was yours, I want you to hear me. Look at the timing. Look at who benefits from the verdict. A person who is genuinely selfish rarely gets called it by the people busy taking from them. They get called it by the people they've refused. The word in your family may be different than the word in mine, but the machine is the same, and it runs on your fear of the word. And the day you stop being afraid of it is the day the machine simply stops working. My house is quiet now. The walls are the color I chose. There's a different chair where my grandmother's used to be, and I've made my peace with it. The key to the front door sits in my pocket, and it belongs to exactly one person. And for the first time in my life, I do not feel that I owe anyone an apology for that. Some nights I sit in the living room where the whole thing nearly slipped through my fingers, and I think about how close I came to giving it all away just to stop being called a name. And then I think about the folder, and the camera that was listening when no one believed me, and the long, quiet patience that turned out to be the loudest thing I ever did. It turns out the most generous thing I ever learned to do was to keep what was mine, and the people who needed me to believe otherwise have, at long last, run out of ways to convince me. So rest easy tonight, whoever you are, in whatever home you've built and been told you don't deserve to keep. You are allowed to hold on to it. You always were. The word they use is just a word. The locks are yours to change. And the quiet, when you finally stop explaining yourself, is the most peaceful sound in the world.